Hey everybody, this is Jonathan Schrantz, and today I want to look at 7 times Bobby Fischer won in 17 moves or less against really strong chess players. If you look in the database at Bobby Fischer's quickest games, his quickest wins, you're going to find a lot of simul games. Those were really interesting, but these are against top-notch players of his time, and we're going to look at how he beat a lot of grandmasters and other strong players in only 17 moves. And I chose 17 very intentionally. That's because he famously, in his book, his 60 Memorable Games, he beat Rubinstein in just 17 moves. So that's where we're going to end. And actually, we are going to start with a Rubinstein game. This very first one, the shortest win against a Grandmaster by Bobby Fischer here, is also a fine game. Fine just has the unlucky results of having been crushed by Bobby Fischer twice in 17 moves or less. And in this first encounter, they played a Philidor defense. This actually was a blitz game. Bobby Fischer has the white pieces here. Rubinstein has the black pieces. And this was played in Manhattan. So again, yeah, it was a quick game, but they played this relatively normal position. And then in this exact position, Fischer played the slightly uncommon queen to e2, just preparing to bring the rook over to the d file. More common, and I actually just want to point it out, there is one little trick in this line. You can actually play knight to g5, putting pressure on that f7 pawn, where it does look like immediately you've blundered a piece, but there's this nice little trick, queen to h5, where black will need to decide between playing g6 or queen to e7. And for example, you might get a position where the queens get traded, and white can argue, I have 2 bishops, and I'm slightly ahead in development. Black can say, yeah, but I'm so solid, I should just be able to defend, and we're both grandmasters, should be a draw here. So this could have been another possible way of playing. However, Fischer decided in this position to play the move queen e2, and after knight f6, rook d1, creating a pin on the d file. Now white is threatening knight takes e5. Whack actually made the losing move in this position. If you can believe it or not, I think he played the most natural looking move in the world. How would you guys defend here? I'm actually kind of curious. And at any point during this lecture, if you want to slow down and pause, just pause the video and see if you can play like Fischer. But fine here, he just played queen to c7, which looks totally correct. You get out of the pin, now this pawn is extra protected. But Fischer played the winning move in this position, knight to g5. And presumably black just saw, okay, if knight g5, I can castle. But after bishop takes f7, he actually had to resign the game. And the point is, if you move the king to h8, there's going to be this fork. So obviously we're going to play rook takes f7. And perhaps he saw this position ahead of time and he said, yeah, okay, if you just take here, this should be a good trade for black. Usually white shouldn't be giving the 2 pieces for the rook. Usually ends up to be good for black. However, he must have spotted queen to c4 is actually the winning idea here for white. There's absolutely no way of blocking this diagonal, and there's no way of protecting the rook, so black here is just going to lose material. So very quick knockout win. And let's return really quick to this decision. And you know, it's a blitz game, so you just instinctually, you just play queen c7. But this is a really nice idea, the idea of attacking f7, with the idea that a queen can eventually come to this diagonal as well, so you can look out for that in your own games. However, a better way for black to possibly defend this position would have been with a move b5. This attacks the bishop, but that's not the primary point. The idea is now we've covered the c4 square. So if the game progressed exactly the same as it did in the game, in this position, after some captures here, no longer would we have the c4 square, so white would have to go in for this, which shouldn't really be white's dream. But yeah, it just goes to show you just how quickly these things can go downhill. And we move on now to our second game. This is the game Theodore Gutescu, who is a Romanian grandmaster. He was given the title, an honorary grandmaster title. And he did win a Romanian championship. I think he's sort of famous for coming in second in a lot of the Romanian championships. Very strong player. And here, this actually will be the most anticlimactic game on this list. This game just ended with a totally outrageous blunder. It was just a big oversight by white. So they're playing one of these Nimzo Indians, and in this position, black plays the very unusual but very interesting concept, knight to c6. And yeah, as beginners, you're normally taught you don't want to put the knight in front of the pawn in these d-pawn openings. Black has more space on the queen side, so usually you want to get your c-pawn out. But he has a very particular idea the main reason of ever putting a knight on c6 this early in front of your pawn is you're going to try to manufacture the move e5. And here he intends on doing it by taking on c4, bringing this bishop back to d6, and only then playing the move e5. And this has some very interesting tactical consequences in this exact position, because we see precisely this. And now after bishop to b5, attacking one of the defenders of the e5 square, we see him play e5 anyway, and after he now takes on d4. So very, very interesting. White simply took back with a pawn, and after this recapture, goes after the knight. And yeah, unfortunately here, after c5, White just makes a tremendous oversight and takes on c5. So hopefully you guys can pause. Hopefully this is definitely the easiest one in the whole lecture. But yeah, an absolutely outrageous blunder. Black simply played bishop takes h2 check, a discovered attack on the queen. So a very well-known idea. You got to watch out for this. This was played in an Olympiad game, but unfortunately this just did not work out well for White. Another quick win for Fischer. This third game was also played in an Olympiad. This is the game between Donato Rivera and Bobby Fischer. Rivera was actually playing for Puerto Rico, and in this game we see yet another Nimzo Indian. This one will be a little bit different after the move a3. We saw this capture, and now an immediate c5. And in this position, we get one of these semi-typical structures in the Nimzo. This tends to be a very solid way for black to play. You line the queen up with the bishop. You follow up with moves such as b6, bishop to b7. And the real question is, where will the knight on b8 go? Often it goes on d7, the idea of not to block this bishop in. But as in the game, we'll see the knight can also go to c6, where it has a little more influence on the center and has the idea of going to a5 sometimes to attack the bishop. The game continued with bishop to b3. After b6, the knights were developed, and bishop to b2. And this move maybe isn't the worst, but it actually does look a little weird, and Bobby Fischer finds a way of punishing this later on in this game. So bishop to b2, not the losing move, but does lead to the winning idea here for black. Here, the knight comes out to c6, and in this position goes immediately to a5. Now, White didn't remove the bishop in any way, and rook to c1 is actually the losing move. Bishop to b7 was such an innocent-looking move, but it actually set a very cunning trap. So can you guys actually figure out, after rook to c1, can you see what the winning maneuver is for black? It starts with the move queen to c6, threatening mate on g2, and after the mate is prevented, queen to b5. So this was the nice idea, maneuvering the queen to c6 to b5. And now you notice with these bishops lined up, if you move the bishop on b3, the other bishop is going to fall. That's what happened in the game, and he just lost the bishop. Here is where he actually resigned. But there's nothing else you can do. You can't protect this bishop, so if you move this guy away or protect this guy, you're going to lose the bishop on b3. I thought this was super clever. I really liked this idea. You threaten the mate and you bring the queen to b5. b5 is not a usual square for the queen, so you can kind of tell why that was a blind spot for White, but a very nice tactical spot here by Fischer. This next game is an absolute attacking masterpiece by Bobby Fischer. This is his game against Peter Dely. Fischer with the white pieces plays a open Sicilian, and obviously he goes for the Fischer-Sozin attack here. He is trying to get that bishop on the long diagonal, attacking the f7 pawn. Black tries to shut it in with the move e6, bishop to b3, a6, and the most common moves here are bishop to e3 and castles. However, he plays a very contentious move, pawn to f4, just hinting at the possibility of playing f5 to increase the scope of the light squared bishop. After queen to a5, creating a pin on the knight, therefore the e4 pawn is under attack. He simply castled, and now came the move knight takes d4, queen takes, and now d5. And this is going to start getting black into a little bit of trouble. Black needs to get the pieces out and castle, but he's already striking in the center very early. Fischer plays the move bishop to e3, and now comes the blunder of the game. Knight takes e4. This is a big mistake. Black could have considered a move like knight to g4, but you don't actually have to give this bishop right away. You can play a move like queen to b6, where if they take, you can take back with the bishop, and this should be fine for White. So in the game, Black actually took on e4. Now white simply takes, and by doing this, he actually increases the bishop slightly. And this next move is a very, very pretty way of enhancing the bishop. He plays the move f5. He's just trying to get rid of this pawn, open up the position, and get an attack on that black king. In the game, the queen went to b5. Again, he's kind of moving pieces too many times in the opening. He's going to get into a lot of trouble now, but it's not so easy. If you take on f5, it is worth pointing out that the second best move recommended by the computer, I'm only pointing it out because it's funny, is the move g4, just opening up that diagonal. I thought that was funny. But yeah, possibly after they recapture on f5, a even better try would be bishop to a4. The idea is not so easy to move the king or block, and after a move like b5, queen e5 just slowly sneaking in is going to be a lot of pressure on black. For example, if bishop to e7, you can simply drop back. Obviously, you also could possibly take on g7, which might be strong as well. But just this simple move is so strong. Not easy for black to castle now because the bishop would be hanging, and it's not super easy to defend the bishop. The rook can't go to a7 due to the bishop on e3, and the queen can't go to c7. That'd be a normal square, but that's protected. And if you go to d8, you're just going to get hit by one of the rooks coming to the d file. So this absolutely would have been crushing for white. So in the game, instead of taking on f5, black tried the move queen to b4, trying to get those queens off. And here, white simply took on e6, trying to open up the position even more. And now if you trade queens, you're going to lose this pawn on f7 with check, and instead he takes here with the bishop. White snatches off that bishop as well, so again, if you trade queens, you're going to lose your f-pawn. So he took back here, and this is absolutely disastrous for black after this next beautiful move. You can pause and see if you can find it. Bobby Fischer, in this position, played the absolutely amazing rook takes f8. And he's just saying, look, you got three ways to take, but these two are pretty easy to rule out as they would hang the queen. So your only real way of taking back is with the queen. Queen takes f8 was played in this game. And now the question is just a matter of how does white get a big enough attack on the king? Certainly we have these open files for the rook, so the rook's coming in must be a huge part of this position, but he can actually create a further weakness for black's camp here after the move queen to a4. And this is the 17th move, and this is where black actually resigned in the game. The point is, first of all, you're not going to be able to move the king anywhere. If you go here, you're on the same file. Okay, you're not going to be able to run this way. We're going to be able to bring our rook in. If you go here, we're going to be able to bring our bishop in. Obviously, it's not going to be so easy to move a king, right? So, b5, right? That's just sort of the normal move. That's what you would play here. But this has actually created a big weakness because now we can take on e4, then we're going to be able to take on e6. Even after the best play, which is, for example, rook to d8, we can insert this move, queen to d6, and just look at how quickly you can get under a tremendous amount of pressure. In this position, white can do basically anything. It's never going to be easy to play rook to f8 because you're going to get hit with bishop to c5. So even though you're in exchange down, black is absolutely tied up, and it's just impossible to ever move the king or get this other rook into the game. So for this reason, after queen to a4, black resigned in this position. Moving on to our fifth game here. This is the game between Bobby Fischer and Robert Steinmeyer, and we have a Caro-Kann. So we get to see how Fischer destroys the Caro-Kann here after knight g3. We have a totally normal Caro-Kann position, and here actually plays the move bishop to d3. A little more common is establishing the pawn on h5 first, or even this move knight to e5. But he just plays bishop to d3, and we actually get a relatively normal Caro-Kann for this kind of position. Black castles on the queen side, and nothing too much is happening. But already, black makes a mistake. Black has a very clever idea that's both tactical and positional in nature, but it actually just backfires immediately. Black's idea was to go queen to f4, force the white queen to move over, and now play the move knight to c5. And the idea is, after the queen moves, tactically he's been able to hop the knight into the e4 square. Typically, this is one of the battlegrounds in the Caro-Kann. You're fighting for that e4 square, and potentially black is thinking, I might be able to win some material here. However, after the move knight to e5, we actually see that even though the f2 pawn is hanging, white actually has a much stronger threat against f7. So it's funny, both the knights are actually doing the same thing. They're both taking f-pawns, forking rooks. However, due to the placement of the black queen, and due to the fact that it's not so easy for black to possibly defend this f-pawn, it's actually white that is going to get a winning position. And after knight takes f2, one of the rooks just blocked the knight here. And black already had to resign. So facing the fact that, yeah, if you just take here, we capture right back, and now there's just absolutely no way of stopping our knight from forking you on f7. So it was kind of funny just how fast it happened. Black looked like they were doing very clever stuff around this point, but it all turns out that it actually backfired tactically, and it was white with the winning attack here. Our sixth game here is actually a really fun one. We saw what he did against the Carl Khan. Now let's look at what he does against the Scandinavian defense. And black, for his part, actually played a very, very aggressive line in this position. Most players are just going to either put this pawn on c6 or develop this bishop to f5 to g4, one of these squares. But knight to c6 is a very ambitious way for black to play. Just saying, I'm going to get this bishop out, I'm going to castle on the queen side, and I'm going to get as much pressure as possible on this d-pawn. So it's a very aggressive and combative way of playing. And in this position, Fischer also said, let's have a battle here, and played the move pawn to d5. Not the most popular move, but it really worked out in this game. Now the d-pawn is under attack, so he throws in this check. Here is this clever way of avoiding it. After c6, there were some captures, and the bishop goes back to a4. Now, it would be very smart for black to play a move like bishop to g4, but already we see the blunder. This is the losing move. It looks very good. Black is playing very ambitiously. He's saying, white, I'm not going to let you castle. I'm going to bring the rook into d8, and I'm going to have a very strong attack. However, it absolutely doesn't work, and the problem is just the simple move, pawn to a3. The defense of c6 is absolutely not easy in this position, so if the knight has to move, you're going to lose that pawn, and yeah, if this happens and there's a fork, you could be in a lot of trouble. Black threw in the move rook to d8, but simply bishop to d2 blocks the file. And now, realizing there's absolutely really nowhere for the knight to go, if the knight does move, you're going to lose this, and a lot of bad stuff is going to happen. So instead, he played rook to d6. He's giving up some material. He's kind of hoping that maybe he's going to have some sort of attack here. But white simply takes, attacks the queen, and swings the queen over to f5. So now white is absolutely winning, but you got to be really careful. Perhaps maybe if we can get rook to e6 in, well, white plays a great move. Bishop to b3, not letting the rook come in, attacking this bishop simultaneously, and who knows, there might even be some tactical threats on f7. Like you can imagine if queen to g4 maybe seems like a normal move attacking a g-pawn. Well, there'd be bishop takes f7, followed up by knight to e5 to win the queen. So yeah, not easy for black already. Finds a very nice way of continuing, knight to e4 with the threat of just taking on e2. This could be an issue for white. White decides just to trade the bishops, and yeah, it's funny because now, yeah, you can't take this way. You get checkmated, and you can take with your queen, give up some material. But he just moves the queen away. After knight takes c3, just simply takes back. The rook is hanging. He moves it away. Fischer castled, and on the 17th move here, black resigned. So very nice way. Black was playing a very aggressive, very ambitious opening, and it just shows the defensive skills that Fischer had as well. We come now to our very last game in this series. This is the one we talked about in the intro. This is Bobby Fischer versus Ruben Fine. And in this game, we saw this was actually a casual game. This was just a Skittles game between two friends here. We saw an Evans Gambit, so we know we're in for a fun one. And the theme here was black being just a little bit too greedy. Went for one pawn too many. So far, this is a totally normal Evans Gambit. After castles, most players here are going to play knight g to e7, just prioritizing development. However, we saw the greedy d takes c3, and this actually gets black into a lot of trouble. Queen to b3 was played. We noticed the attention on the f7 square, so now black needs to defend it, and white simply recaptures on c3. Now, if black does play this way, potentially he might need to just take here on c3. This might be a possible way of continuing, And if you want more info on it, you can actually see Bobby Fischer's notes in the study. I'm going to link it in the description below. So if you want to go back, you want to look at the study and see all of his annotations for yourself, you're welcome to do that. Just look below, hit the link, and it'll take you to Lichess so you can see all these games and study them with an engine and a little bit of analysis along the sides as well. But he didn't take. He instead played knight to f6, and this is the truly losing move, and this is where it really goes downhill for black. White actually has two good moves in this position. e5 is one of the good ones, and I really like the one he played in the game. He just played the move knight to d5. The idea is we're attacking a lot of stuff, so when you take, we're going to open up the e file, and this is going to be a big problem. And the other problem is black is only one move away from castling. So white does need to demonstrate every single move that he can keep the initiative going. And, after the knight moves, he again needs to play forcing move after forcing move, bishop to b2, and after the queen moves away, he needs to find a way to demonstrate that he's actually winning this game. And what white would actually really love to do in this position is he really wants to take on g7. If he could take on g7 and make this queen move away, he also potentially has ideas of putting one of the rooks, sacking a rook by playing rook to e1. You can only take one of the rooks, and then it should have a big checkmating attack. So he plays this brilliant move. Pawn to h4, attacking the queen, trying to distract her from the g-pawn. And here, after the bishop took back, rook to g8, he played a very nice move. Rook f to e1. Black could take one rook or not. Black decided not to. And now on the 17th move, Fischer played the winning move. And you can go ahead, pause your videos. This was a very nice move. It's a very fun one to play. The idea, the hint here, is that we really want to play checkmate. We want bishop f6 to be checkmate. Obviously, it's not because of the queen, so we need to find some way of distracting the queen on h4. And the way he did it during the game was with queen to g3. A beautiful move, and there's absolutely nowhere for the queen to go. Can't really go anywhere on this diagonal. And there's not going to be any other sacrifices or blocks that are going to work or help black out in this position. So yeah, that was just 17 quick knockout wins by Bobby Fischer against really strong players. I really like this format, so if there's another player, let me know in the description below. If there's somebody else, whether it's a famous player, a modern player, or somebody else, whoever you'd like to know, let me know if there's somebody you want to know what their quickest wins were, and maybe we'll make a video about that. So please hit subscribe and hit like, and yeah, I'll see you guys next time for another video.